In the previous video, we took a look at how we could take a modular approach to creating assets that we could then use to create environments that can be configured in many different ways in a game engine. In this video, we're going to take those tunnel assets that we created and we're going to bring them into Unity. Let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and prepare to export out these assets from Maya and bring them into Unity. One thing I'd like to mention, just very quickly, I did rework these slightly. Initially, when I created them, I was using Maya's grid. Probably not exactly the best choice because the grid is 24 centimeters by 24 centimeters. I just created this cube and I made it 24 by 24 by 24 centimeters. You'll have a much easier time using the grid in Unity if you deal with numbers such as 10 or 100, numbers like that rather than 24. So I have rescaled these so that they'll work a little bit more easily using Unity's grid. And just in case you're wondering, I did scale these so that, for instance, this straight piece is 1 meter long right now, or 100 centimeters. We will be rescaling them in Unity, but because I'm working with these dimensions, it'll make scaling them very easy so that we can more easily work with these using Unity's grid. So we'll go ahead and get started and start exporting these objects out. I'm going to bring them all back to the origin here. And I'll just export them out one by one, starting with the tunnel straight. To export out the objects, simply select them, go to File, Export Selection. You'll want to make sure to export it out as an FBX. And I'm simply going to name it the same thing as the mesh. I'm going to go through and export the rest of them now. So I've exported out all my pieces and now I'm going to head over to Unity and we'll import them in. So I'm going to create a new folder for this so that we can keep these assets organized. And we'll go ahead and navigate to where I saved them. I'll select them all and bring them in. So now that we have these assets in here, we can go ahead and start bringing them into our scene. I'm going to start with the straight tunnel section and we'll test that out first. I will just drag it into my hierarchy. And for a sense of scale, we'll bring a character in as well. And as you can see, our tunnel piece is quite small, so we'll go ahead and scale it up. I won't be scaling it up randomly because I'm thinking about the grid and how I'm going to want to use the grid to more conveniently place these tunnel pieces later on. And I think that this should be good. I made it 20 by 20 by 20 because each one of these squares on the grid is 10 by 10. And if we zoom in, then we also have the 1 meter grid. And if we look at the character inside the tunnel, I think this scale should work fine. Now, if we test out this tunnel piece, it's not going to work. If I play it, you'll see that my character simply falls through the surface. I'm going to fly back up here. The reason is that we haven't set any collision to it. So what we need to do is set collision on this tunnel piece so that we don't fall through it, so that we will collide with it. So with the tunnel piece selected, I'm just going to go to Add Component, Physics, and we'll add a Mesh Collider here, and it'll use itself, because we haven't assigned another mesh to it, it'll simply use itself as collision. Now if we test this out, we no longer fall through the tunnel. So let's go ahead and bring in the other tunnel pieces and place them as well and set up their collision. I'm going to go to my top viewport and I'll put it in isometric view. And I'll go to my tunnel assets where we have those. We've got the straight piece in here. We can go ahead and just drag in the rest of these. So here's our four-way intersection. I'll go ahead and scale it up 20 by 20 by 20 like we did the other one. Very important that we scale them equally. And because I have this grid, if I hold down Control, I can easily move this and it'll pop it right into place. You can see that it lines up perfectly because it's also been scaled to work with this grid. We'll go ahead and set up its collision as well. And try another piece. Here's a dead end piece. We'll go ahead and bring that in. Scale it. Set up its collision. And we can go ahead and situate it as well. Again, remember I'm holding down Control so that I can easily just snap pieces into place. One other thing actually I should mention is that if you select your rotate tool and you hold down Control, you can also rotate this in increments very easily. Although I do notice that it doesn't do it perfectly. You'll notice that with the rotation, I seem to always get this minute little value here that I actually don't want. But we'll go ahead and perhaps situate this piece here. So again, using these tools to snap things into place makes working with these modular pieces very convenient. Now, if you're wondering about how to change the grid or change the snap settings for the rotation as well as for the placement for the translation, you'll find that here under Edit, Grid and Snap Settings. And you can see that I currently have my move set to 10 meters. That's how I'm able to conveniently snap it to my grid here. You can change that value to work for other values that you might need to make snapping easier. You'll notice also that I have rotate set to 45 right now, but you can also change that number to whatever you want. And of course, you can also change the actual grid size as well. Go ahead and drag some more pieces in here. We've already got these 3 pieces here. So let's go ahead and bring another one in. We'll bring the tunnel T in. Scale it up like the other ones. and set up its collision. And we'll situate it as well. And I'm not sure, I think I've made a mistake here, so I might have to look into that piece a little bit more and see what's going on there, because it does not appear to be snapping in place properly. But I'll take a look at that in just a moment. We can try some of these other ones first. And that one seems to work fine. Better remember, however, to apply the collision to it. And I believe we've got one more piece to try out here, the tunnel up. Add the collision, very easy to forget. Test this out. And we'll have to go and check on that piece that didn't quite work, but so far everything else appears to be working fine. Now we know that this tunnel T piece is not working properly, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it and go and re-export it. Let's go back to Maya and see if we can troubleshoot and figure out what's going on with it. So here I am back in Maya. I've got my pieces one on top of the other. Notice that the straight piece, where its pivot point is, tunnel turn, dead end, tunnel up. You'll notice that they all have the pivot point located in the same position right here at the origin of my 3D space. But when I select the tunnel T, the pivot point is actually down here. So I'm not sure at what point I moved the pivot point accidentally, I suppose. Not sure when that would have happened, but I'm simply going to move it back so that it's in the proper placement. Perhaps to more easily see this, I'll hide these other objects. Select the tunnel T, and we'll move that pivot point back to the origin here. That should be good, and we'll go ahead and re-export it out. And let's return to Unity and see if this fixes it. I'll import it back in. drag it into my scene, scale it, and we'll go ahead and place it perhaps back here. And that seems to work just fine. Let's go ahead and add that collision to it. And we can go ahead and test it out as well. And it seems to work fine. Looks like there's a little bit of an issue here. Looks like I'll need to go back to Maya and rework it slightly. There's a little bit of a gap. So I did go back into Maya and it just required a little bit of fixing the vertices around these entrances. I'm not sure where I broke that. I think it was probably when I was creating variations using soft select, and I probably made my my fall off area too large in Maya when I was working on that, and made some slight adjustments to those vertices. But now it's working, and we've got all the pieces in here to test to see how they're looking. Let's go ahead and create the material for them now and then apply that to these objects. I'm going to go ahead and create a new material for it, which we'll call tunnel mat. And we'll go ahead and import in the textures for it. We have both a normal map and a color map for this. The little message that just popped up was just indicating that this is a normal map, and or it was recognizing it as a normal map and wanted me to flag it as a normal map. I'm going to select my material here. We'll take the color texture and apply it to our albedo, although it looks like it's already taking the materials here, but we're going to go ahead and use this new material that I'm creating here. I'll go ahead and apply my normal map to the normal map section of the material. And we'll go ahead and apply this material to all of these pieces here. And if we play it, we can see that we now have our materials on here. I think I might want to decrease that specularity a little bit at least, but otherwise it looks like the textures are working fine. I'm going to select my material, and I'll just bring down the the smoothness attribute a little. And for the time being, I think that that works. Now that I have these pieces in here with the materials properly set up as well as collision, it would make sense to make prefabs of these so that I don't have to do those settings again, the scaling and all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a folder here for my tunnel prefabs. And I'm just going to drag these different pieces into the folder to create the prefabs that I can use. as we build a more elaborate tunnel system. Now, I'd like to just mention one thing real quick. I've got my prefabs here, and I did, within the prefabs in here, set their position and rotation numbers back to 0. The reason being that when I drag these into my hierarchy, I want them to go right to the origin. Instead of going into this placement where I had placed it earlier. Now, one thing about the tunnel system that isn't quite working for me right now is the lighting. So I don't really like the lighting that it's currently using. So what I'm going to do is select my directional light here, and I'm going to delete it. Actually, I believe I can get rid of this main camera as well because my character actually has a camera associated with it already. So now we don't have any lights in our scene, and when we enter the tunnel, it is quite dark and impossible to find our way around. So let's create a new light. And I'm going to go to Game Object, Light, and I'm going to use a point light for this. And we'll go ahead and just position this light. It might make it a little easier if we don't look at the scene right now with light. So I'll go ahead and click on this light bulb icon here so that we can actually see the scene with more default lights rather than our own lighting. And we'll just raise this light up a little bit above in the tunnel here. We can go to an isometric side view if we want to get a better sense of where it's actually being placed. Click on the light bulb again so that we can see the effect that it's having, and we can adjust its parameters. So we've got a range, which according to this is it controls how far the light is emitted from the center of the object. Right now it's set to 10, which we can increase or decrease. And of course we can also increase the intensity of our light. As well as the color. For the time being, I'll leave the color as it is. And here's our lighting. I think I'll turn on shadows. And that starts to look a little more like we're actually in a cave. I'm going to spend a few minutes placing some more lights in my scene. So I went ahead and placed some more lights in my tunnel system here, and then one thing I decided to do was to create actually another set of prefabs. So now I have one set with all these pieces without any lights, and then another with lights. That way I can easily drop in a prefab. It already has a light in there, because in most cases I'll probably want to have a light in there, but there might be some cases where I want to have one of these pieces without a light. So here's what my cave system looks like right now with its lights. I think what I'm going to do now is drop in some more pieces and make a more elaborate tunnel system. So I finished creating a system of tunnels with dead ends and twists and turns using my modular system that I created in Maya. Let's go ahead and check it out. Lots of choices. And an end destination here with my fire particle. So that's it for this video. I think that creating a modular system such as I have done here is a very fun thing to do, and it's a great way to give game designers some art assets that they can utilize and configure in lots of different ways. I'd like to continue working on this cavern system that I've created, adding things such as stalactites, stalagmites, big cavernous rooms, as well as creating a bunch of additional art assets to sprinkle throughout. Perhaps I'll do that in a future video. Anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.